On one short avenue, in one tiny town on the coast of Rhode Island, the richest families America has ever produced built a row of European palaces. Not one, a whole street of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, each one grander than the last. They called them cottages. That was the joke, because a cottage in Newport might have 70 rooms and a ballroom lined in gold and 500,000 cubic feet of marble hauled across the ocean to build it. And here is the strange thing. These were not the homes these families lived in. This was where they spent their summers. 10 weeks a year. For a season that short, the Vanderbilts and the Astors and the coal barons and the Silver Kings poured out fortunes that would run, in today's money, into the hundreds of millions of dollars each. So how did it happen? How did a quiet seaside town become the single greatest concentration of private palaces in American history? Who built these houses and how, in an age before the machines we would use today? And above all, what drove a handful of the wealthiest people on Earth to spend so wildly, so competitively, on homes they would barely live in? This is not the story of one mansion. This is the story of the whole golden madness from the beginning. To understand why the palaces rose where they did, you first have to understand Newport itself, because Newport was chosen, and the choosing has a story. Newport was old. Founded in 1639, it had been one of the busiest and most important seaports in colonial America, a center of trade of every kind, including the darkest kind, the trade in enslaved human beings. But the Revolutionary War broke its fortunes, and for a long time afterward, the town drifted, its harbor quiet, its great days seemingly behind it. What saved Newport was its weather. Sitting out on an island in Narragansett Bay, cooled by the ocean on every side, the town stayed fresh and breezy through the brutal heat of the American summer. And in the 1800s, that was worth more than gold. The great cities of the East and the plantations of the South became furnaces in July, and worse, they became sick, swept by outbreaks of malaria and yellow fever. So the wealthy began to flee the heat, and many of them fled to Newport. At first they came quietly, artists and writers and scholars, southern planters escaping the fever season, families looking for cool ocean air and a slower life. But money follows money. And by the years after the Civil War, a new kind of American had appeared, richer than anyone the country had ever seen. And these new titans wanted a summer kingdom of their own, because the Civil War had opened the floodgates. In the decades that followed, America industrialized at a furious, unregulated pace. There was no income tax. There were almost no rules. And a small number of men seized the railroads, the steel, the coal, the silver, and built fortunes so enormous they are difficult to picture even now. Critics called them robber barons. And when these families looked for a place to display what they had won, they looked at that cool, beautiful, half-forgotten town on the sea, and they saw a blank canvas. But there was a war waiting for them there. Not a war of armies, a war of society, because being rich was not enough. Old money, the families who had been wealthy for generations, the Astors above all, looked down on the new industrial fortunes as vulgar, as invaders, as people with money but no breeding. At the very top of that old world sat one woman, Mrs. Caroline Astor, who quite literally decided who was and who was not a member of American high society. Her circle was said to number 400 people. And if you were not among the 400, you did not exist. The new families were desperate to break in. And the way they would break in, the weapon they would use, was architecture. If you could not be born into society, you could build your way into it. You could raise a house so magnificent, throw parties so spectacular, that the old guard would have no choice but to open the door. And no family understood this game better or played it more ruthlessly than the Vanderbilts. The Vanderbilt fortune was the largest in the country. It had been founded by the old Commodore, Cornelius Vanderbilt, who clawed his way up from a boy running a small boat to the master of America's railroads, and who died the richest man in the nation, worth around $100 million in an age when a working man made a few $100s a year. But for all that money, the Vanderbilts were still new money, still shut out by Mrs. Astor and her 400. And one member of the family decided to end that permanently. Her name was Alva Vanderbilt. And Alva was not a woman who accepted closed doors. Married to William K. Vanderbilt, a grandson of the old Commodore, Alva had already stormed New York society by building a French chateau on Fifth Avenue and throwing a costume ball so lavish, so impossible to ignore, that Mrs. Astor herself was finally forced to acknowledge the Vanderbilts. The trick Alva played was pure genius and pure cruelty. She let it be known that her spectacular ball would be the event of the year, and then she quietly informed Mrs. Astor's own daughter that the girl could not be invited because the Astors had never formally called on the Vanderbilts. And so, socially, the two families had never met. Mrs. Astor, unwilling to let her daughter be shut out of the party everyone was talking about, had no choice. She swallowed her pride, drove to the Vanderbilt mansion, and left her calling card. With that one small card, the wall came down. The door had been kicked open. But Alva was not finished. She turned her eyes to Newport, and she resolved to build there something that had never been seen in America. Not a cottage, a temple. In 1888, William K. Vanderbilt gave the order to their favorite architect. Build, he said, the finest home that money can buy. And money, it turned out, was very nearly no object. The architect was a man named Richard Morris Hunt, and he is the second great key to this entire story, because Hunt, more than any single person, is the man who built Gilded Age Newport. He had been the first American ever to train at the famous École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, the greatest architecture school in the world, and he came home with the palaces of Europe burned into his mind. He knew how a king's house was supposed to look, and now American railroad money was asking him to build one. For Alva, Hunt looked to France, to the Petit Trianon, the exquisite little palace on the grounds of Versailles, built for French royalty. And from that inspiration, he raised what they named Marble House. The name was not poetry, it was fact. Marble House was built from around 500,000 cubic feet of marble, gathered from quarries in Italy, in Africa, in America, and shipped across the world to this one plot of ground on Bellevue Avenue. The reported cost was staggering, around $11 million, of which the contemporary press claimed $7 million was spent on the marble alone. In today's money, that is well over $300 million for a summer house. And here is the detail that tells you everything about the world these people lived in. That colossal, world-altering house, 4 years in the building, hidden behind fences the entire time so that no one could see it rise, was a birthday present. William gave Marble House to Alva as a gift for her 39th birthday, and it was unveiled in the summer of 1892 in the most theatrical way imaginable. Picture that night. For 4 years, the people of Newport had walked past a tall fence on Bellevue Avenue with no idea what was climbing behind it. Then the invitations went out for a great dedication ball, and on the appointed evening, the carriages rolled up to iron gates in near total darkness. The house beyond kept deliberately unlit, a black shape against the night sky. The guests gathered, waiting, and then, at the chosen moment, the lights came up all at once, and 500,000 cubic feet of white marble leapt out of the darkness, columns and arches and shining stone glowing in the lamplight. It was not a house being shown to friends. It was a weapon being revealed to rivals. Marble House changed everything. Before it, Newport's cottages had largely been grand wooden houses. After it, the game was stone, and marble and European palaces, and there was no going back. The arms race had begun. And the next shot was fired from within the Vanderbilt family itself, because William had an older brother. His name was Cornelius Vanderbilt II, and he was the head of the family, the chairman of the Great Railroad. And by the rules of that world, he could not possibly allow his younger brother's wife to own the grandest house in Newport. Cornelius already had a summer home on the Newport cliffs, a house called the Breakers. And then in 1892, the very year Marble House was unveiled, fate handed Cornelius his opportunity. The old wooden breakers burned to the ground. What Cornelius built in its place would become the crown of the entire Gilded Age. He called on the same architect, Richard Morris Hunt, and he gave two commands: make it grander than anything else in Newport, and make it, above all, impossible to burn. Hunt answered with an Italian Renaissance palazzo, inspired by the great 16th century palaces of Genoa and Turin, a house of steel and stone with almost no wood in its bones at all. To be certain no fire could ever take it again, the very boilers that heated the house were buried in a vault under the front lawn, connected to the mansion by a tunnel, so that the fire that warmed the palace lived entirely outside its walls. And then Hunt did something that still seems barely believable. He built the Breakers, all 70 rooms of it, in a little over 2 years. How? By throwing an army at it. Some 2,000 workers labored on the Breakers, working in shifts around the clock, through the day, and on into the night, so that the great house never stopped rising. And these were not only laborers laying stone. This was an international operation. Whole rooms of the mansion were designed and crafted in Europe, in the workshops of Paris, then taken apart, packed, shipped across the Atlantic, and reassembled inside the house in Newport, piece by numbered piece. The music room was built in France and shipped over whole. The finest artisans of the old world, the marble carvers and the gilders and the mosaic setters, crossed an ocean to work on one family's summer home. When it was finished in 1895, the Breakers had 70 rooms, 33 of them just for the servants who kept the place alive. It rose 5 stories over the cliffs on 13 acres of ground. At its heart stood a great hall rising 50 feet, an indoor courtyard of marble columns and gilded stone, meant to take your breath the instant you stepped inside. And it did, and it still does. Step through the doors and into that hall, and you understand at once what all the money was for. Above you, the ceiling floats 50 feet up, painted like an open sky. Around you, walls of warm Italian marble climb story after story, wrapped in carved stone and gold. A grand staircase sweeps upward. Beyond the arches, through tall windows, the Atlantic Ocean itself crashes against the cliffs, framed like a painting the family happened to own. Everything in the room is arranged to do one thing to a visitor, and it is the same thing a king's throne room was built to do. It is meant to make you feel small. It is meant to remind you without a single word being spoken exactly whose house you are standing in. Its final cost was around $7 million. And here is the almost comic twist of the brothers' rivalry. The Breakers was larger than Marble House and built in half the time. And yet it cost less because William had spent $7 million on marble alone. For the architect, it was a triumph and a farewell. The Breakers was Richard Morris Hunt's masterpiece, the greatest thing he ever made. It was also his last. He died in Newport in the summer of 1895 while supervising the final touches on the house that would define his name forever. But the race did not stop with the Vanderbilts. Once Marble House and the Breakers had set the standard, every great fortune in America felt the pull. And one by one, they came to Bellevue Avenue to build their answer. The coal barons came. Edward Berwind, the son of a German immigrant who had risen to become one of the most powerful men in the country on the black wealth of Pennsylvania coal, raised a mansion called the Elms, finished in 1901. For it, he hired a rising Philadelphia architect, Horace Trumbauer, and modeled the house on an elegant 18th century French chateau. But the Elms was not only a look backward. It was one of the most modern homes in America, among the first anywhere to run entirely on electricity, with no backup system at all. So complete was the Berwyn's faith in the new power. Behind the house spread some of the most beautiful formal gardens in Newport. 10 acres of terraces and fountains and sunken gardens and clipped green, tended by a small army of groundsmen. The Silver Kings came. Teresa Ulrichs, an heiress to one of the great silver fortunes of the American West, built Rosecliff, finished in 1902. She turned to the celebrated firm of McKim, Mead, and White, and they gave her a house modeled on the Grand Trianon at Versailles, gleaming white, built around the largest ballroom in all of Newport, a room so vast it was later used, of all things, as a roller skating rink. Teresa was so hungry to entertain in it that the legend says she threw her first party there before the house was even finished. House after house, fortune after fortune, the avenue filled. There was Belcourt, the mansion of Oliver Belmont, another Richard Morris Hunt palace, and the house where Alva Vanderbilt would land after she stunned society a second time by divorcing William, keeping Marble House in the settlement, and marrying Belmont. One of her former husband's oldest friends, there was Ochre Court and Beechwood of the Astors, and grand pile after grand pile stretching down Bellevue Avenue and along the cliffs. At the height of it all, this one small town held more than 300 summer estates. Nowhere else in America, before or since, has private wealth been packed so densely or displayed so nakedly in stone. And a pattern ran through nearly all of them. A shared secret of how these palaces were truly made. They were, in a sense, imported. The men who built them were not trying to invent an American style. They were trying to buy Europe and ship it home. The inspiration came from Versailles, from the palaces of Italy, from the chateaux of France. The interiors, again and again, were designed by the same Parisian decorating house, Allard and Sons, and crafted in Europe. The marble came from Italy and Africa. The tapestries, the paintings, the antique paneling, the gilded furniture, all of it was hunted across the old world by agents and dealers and packed onto ships. A Newport cottage was, in truth, a European palace disassembled, carried across 3,000 miles of ocean, and put back together on the Rhode Island coast. Think about what that actually meant as a feat of logistics in an age of steamships and horse carts. In a workshop in Paris, craftsmen would build an entire room. Every panel, every carving, every strip of gilded molding fitted all together to be certain it was perfect. And then take the whole thing apart again. Each piece was numbered, wrapped, and crated. The crates were hauled to the docks, loaded onto ships, and sent across the Atlantic over weeks of open sea. They arrived at American ports, were transferred to rail and cart, and finally reached Newport, where other craftsmen unpacked the numbered pieces and rebuilt the room inside the rising mansion, like the largest and most expensive puzzle ever assembled. 500,000 cubic feet of marble made a journey like that. So did whole ballrooms and libraries and music rooms. These houses were not just built, they were shipped. And onto that old world beauty, the builders grafted the brand new wonders of their own age. This was the cutting edge of technology in its day. Hydraulic elevators rose silently between the floors. Electric light, still a marvel to most Americans, blazed through rooms that dripped with gold. There were the first electric refrigeration systems, telephones, vast modern kitchens and boiler rooms and service tunnels, all the invisible machinery of a small city, hidden beneath and behind the fantasy, so that the guests upstairs never saw the effort that held it all in the air. So imagine now what it was all for. Imagine the season at its height. For a few short weeks each summer, the whole avenue came alive. The families arrived from New York with their trunks and their servants, and the great houses that had stood shuttered and silent all winter threw open their doors. And then the war of society was fought, night after night, in ballrooms and gardens up and down Bellevue Avenue. There were dinners where the courses ran into the double digits. There were balls where a single evening's flowers cost a laborer's yearly wage many times over. Hostesses schemed and spent to outshine one another. And a woman like Alva Vanderbilt could break a rival simply by refusing her an invitation. This was the entire purpose of the palaces. They were not homes. They were stages, built at unimaginable cost, for a performance of wealth and power that lasted only 10 weeks a year, and then went dark again until the next summer. To run one of these houses took a hidden population of workers. Behind every gilded party stood dozens of butlers, footmen, maids, cooks, and gardeners, living in those cramped servant rooms up under the roof, laboring out of sight to make one family's summer look effortless. The palaces of Newport were monuments to a handful of fortunes, but they were built and kept alive by the hands of thousands of ordinary people whose names history mostly did not bother to record. And then, as suddenly as it had risen, the Golden Age ended. The thing that killed it was not a fire or a war, though the war played its part. The thing that killed it was, in the end, arithmetic. In 1913, America created the federal income tax, and for the first time, these vast fortunes began to be steadily trimmed. Then came the First World War, and the world that had produced the Gilded Age, a world of unlimited money and unquestioned privilege, began to fall away. The families grew older. The fortunes divided among heirs, and the simple, staggering cost of keeping a 70-room marble palace alive for a 10-week summer became harder and harder to justify. One by one, the great houses fell quiet. Some families sold. Some simply locked the doors and walked away. By the middle of the 20th century, these palaces, which had cost the earth to build, were seen by many as white elephants, too expensive to keep, too enormous to sell, worth more as empty land than as houses. And the wrecking ball began to circle. The Elms, one of the most beautiful of them all, came within 2 weeks of being torn down and replaced by a development. That any of it survives at all is thanks to a group of people in Newport who refused to let the palaces die. In 1945, they formed the Preservation Society of Newport County, and in the decades that followed, they fought, house by house, to rescue these mansions from the wrecking ball, buying the Elms just weeks before its scheduled demolition, saving the breakers, Marble House, Rosecliff, and more, and opening them to the public as museums. And so today, that short avenue on the sea is something no other country quite has. You can walk up Bellevue Avenue and step through the doors of Marble House and stand in the same shining rooms where Alva Vanderbilt plotted her wars. You can enter the 50-foot Great Hall of the Breakers and feel exactly the awe that Cornelius Vanderbilt built it to produce. You can wander the gardens of the Elms, as the coal baron once did. Millions of people a year now walk freely through palaces that once existed to keep ordinary people out. That is the final irony of Newport, and perhaps the most fitting one. The richest families in American history built these houses to lift themselves above everyone else, to draw a line between the 400 and the rest of the country. And in the end, the line dissolved. The families faded, the fortunes scattered, and the palaces they raised to divide the world now belong, in a way, to all of us. But those families did not vanish without a trace. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the names that built this golden avenue, each carried its own story of rise and glory, and in more than a few cases, of a fall just as dramatic as the climb. And some of those stories are stranger than anything they ever built in stone.